Hello everyone, this is Dragothien here, and welcome back to another Rise of Kingdoms video. In front of you we have my build for Zhang Yu, and this is my build for almost every skill damage commander with the skill talent tree in the game that I use in KVK, heavy battles, and what's gotten me across all my T5 accounts roughly 8 billion kill points plus or minus, and another 200 to 300 million kills that aren't registered because they were before they were tracked in 2019 of October. In my opinion, this is the best way to use your skill damage commanders, and I'm going to give you the reasons why, and I'm also going to give you some counterpoints as to when you shouldn't be using Feral Nature, or if you're using Feral Nature, what you shouldn't attack as a skill damage Feral Nature using commander user. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the video. Now, before I get started, funny story, I was doing a bunch of testing for Rage content for you guys, and because the baby ended up arriving a few days early, and because I got tied up with streams and everything else, the stuff that I did for that content, which landed me in jail in 9/16, has expired. But we're going to go through all this stuff here, and I'm going to show you what's going on here and what points I'm going to be making from this report itself, not necessarily the battle log, although it would have been nice. We need to make a little bit of a distinction on what I mean with the video that's coming up. So really there's two forms of fighting right now, and you can add in Champions of Olympia or something like that if you want to, but who cares, right? It's fun and everything for a little bit. There's really two main fighting things in this game, right? It is KVK, and it is Ark of Osiris, and by extension, Osiris League, etc., etc. The things that John Wick says in his video are basically spot on. And in fact, I may lean towards his conclusions in his videos for Ark, because you can plan it. You can organize it that way. You can control the fights, where they happen, when they happen, who's coming to the middle, who's bringing what, who has what commanders, who has the... You can plan that stuff. For Ark, you can really organize, and that's why, I mean, that's John Wick's claim to fame, is how good he and his team in OV in Ark of Osiris. And again, his results are really, really heavy leaning, in my opinion, towards Ark gameplay, where you can really kind of get away with not taking Feral Nature because you can control everything. In real world fighting and KVK, you just can't do that generally, especially for a longer period of time. And more often than not, the fights that matter in Ark, for instance, will last a decent amount of time because it's the middle fight, right? It's either the middle fight or it's swarming a structure to go down or something like that. With KVK, it's chaos. You don't know who you have with you. You don't know if people will have to go back to refresh their troops. You won't know if they will have the right builds. You don't know if they'll have the right tech. You don't know who they'll have, what they'll have, the commanders they'll have, the gear they have, the accessories that you don't have any of that. You don't know any of that. You're not planning that stuff before you make a push to go attack a flag. That's not in the vernacular of in Discord. Okay, guys, I want to make sure before we go into this next flag section, who's got how many Williams? Do you have war drums on? Do you have a Horn of Fury, which again, that's again going to lead into this conversation. Do you have all these things? Do you have all this stuff? Do we have a proper amount of Joan buffs? Do we have all the William buffs that we need? Do we have all the Mulan buffs we need? Do we have enough Trajans? Do we have all that stuff together? How many people have Kerouac drums? Let's make sure before we push that we have all that stuff lined up. I want you to be here, 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 and here. And then I want all the fighting. No, none of that happens, right? I mean, you can see where I'm going with that, right? Nobody does that, and it wouldn't be beneficial to do that. You're going to lose the initiative if you're sitting there trying to plan who has what, how many times, where it needs to be in a classical like Ark sense, like a middle Ark fight sense. Like, you're just not going to have that in KVK, especially with the dissolution of murder balls in general, where you just park it and you're like, okay, I don't have to move because I'll trigger whenever somebody hits an AoE. That's gone. That's gone, guys. You can't use that anymore. So in KVK, all the stuff that he was talking about to me is accurate. You can bank on that stuff, right? Like, that stuff will happen. But the conclusions from that information don't apply to KVK, in my opinion. In my opinion. And again, I have to give him all kinds of kudos and shout outs and everything. Dude's an amazing stat guy, and he breaks down all this stuff amazingly. There's a reason why I don't do most of that stuff on my channel, because the stuff that I do on my channel are heavy focused on reality when it comes to KVK and the experience of KVK, and giving you tips on high level content from a true fighting standpoint. John Wick's value, and this is why he's blown up so quickly, and not to mention he's a nice guy and I've talked to him forever, but he does things a different way. He looks at things from an analytical standpoint, from a cookie cutter box standpoint, and especially leans towards Ark of Osiris. A lot of his data is really rooted in trying to figure out the best combinations to win the middle fights, and the best combinations to give you what you need to be successful on an Ark battlefield. And his stuff does work in KVK too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's not KVK fluent or whatever, right? Because he's in the kingdom that's got tons of KVK experience. But what I'm saying is, from a data standpoint, the data that he's bringing to the table, it has to do more with those controlled style fights like Ark of Osiris, and really understanding the base mechanics of the game, so that you can then say, okay, well, this is how I play. I play in KVK, or I play in Ark. I play in Ark. This data makes a ton of sense. I'm going to make it to where I have everything I need so that I can use those few extra points in my talent tree on Khan to then go and get Disarm, and then go and get the extra 6% march speed, and then go and get that extra 1% health. I'm going to go do that. I want that. I don't need Feral Rage, because I've got my William behind me. I've got my Joan behind me. I've got my Trajan buffs. I've got all this stuff. Okay. I've got all this stuff ready to go. I've got a horn. I don't even need it. I don't need Feral Rage, because I'm going to be casting pretty quickly anyway. I still think you need Feral Rage in those situations, by the way, but it at least starts leaning more towards not needing it at that point, because you're going to be having more and more and more opportunities to be at cap consistently, where you can trust that it'll happen, because the commanders are there. But those turns that are not capped, which for a normal KVK experience, 80% of your turns are not capped, which means that you have that chance of proccing Feral Nature on an 80% pool. That's really strong. And that 100 proc changes the entire complexity of the fight, the entire dynamic of the fight, and that's why you should have Feral Nature every single time. When you're using Feral Nature, what target should you think twice about hitting? Okay, so during the testing, I kind of came across a little bit of a revelation for myself, which I think if we think about it, it's actually pretty common sense, but I didn't think it was this impactful to the point where I'm actually going to avoid these targets on the field now if I'm using a lot of Feral Nature based talent builds. Now, again, if I'm using support trees, if I'm using, attack based trees, defense based trees, this won't apply to me, right? Because Feral Nature is not in those talent trees and I don't have to worry about it. But if I'm using, like on my main account, I'm going to be using a ton of Feral Nature based Cav commander attacks here, because this is a Cav account. It's a main Cav account. It's got all the Cavs commanders out there except for Jadwiga. And I rely on heavy skill damage to basically insta-drop targets. Whenever I target something, it takes 10-15 seconds and it dies because of the setup that I've got, okay? You don't want to target any commander with skill damage reduction to a certain degree. So obviously Takeda, for instance, has skill damage reduction. It's only 5%, not that big of a deal. But with Saladin and with Ramses and other commanders like that, where they have larger skill damage reduction buffs applied to them, you want to avoid them, because they reduce the benefit that you'll get by casting more often. Archers anyway, don't go Feral Nature, because the main talent in the archer tree is just so good, especially when it comes to rallies. So again, you want to have that full tree for archers. You don't want to have the full tree for Cavs or with infantry. For archers, you don't want to go Feral Nature, because there's better talents in the archer tree than there are in the Cav and the infantry tree. So okay, so as you can see, I have Zhang Yu versus Zhang Yu. I've got Korra the Insane and myself. We both have equal everything, same everything. The commander view is exactly the same. The commanders themselves are exactly the same. The same builds are being used. The same civilizations. The same stats. The same bonus. Everything is the same. Everything is the same. No alliances, off territory, etc., 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 etc. All that's the same. Okay, let's get past that point, because I still get questions whenever I'm doing these testings for you guys. We're like, but were you guys doing that? Yeah, everything's the same. Everything's the same, I promise, okay? So here's the deal. we were testing out feral nature versus not feral nature, and obviously 1 versus 1, it's not. In fact, the whole premise of this video is that you can't go necessarily off of 1 versus 1 data. Okay, it's a helpful starting point, which is why we're starting here, but I want to go into this and then expand on what it means for open field and the reality of fighting and the reality of warfare inside of Rise of Kingdoms. So on this battle report here, we have Zhang Yu Saladin versus Zhang Yu Saladin, and we wanted to test feral nature versus not feral nature. And this particular test here was with 100,000 versus 100,000 troops, and I had feral nature, whereas Koro the Insane did not. Now, as you'll notice here, at 100,000 and 100,000, I took a worse trade with feral nature than without feral nature, because Koro here beat up on me. Keep an eye on the actual commanders as to why this is actually taking place. Here is another Zhang Yu Saladin with 210,000. The same exact fight, except with 210,000 troops instead of 100,000. I wanted to see if maybe a bigger troop pool would affect the actual outcome. Sure enough, it did not. I took even more severely wounded, basically the same ratio as from the 100,000 fight. Now let's go ahead and switch it over to a non-Saladin fight. Zhang Yu Osman versus Zhang Yu Osman. As you can see, we're starting to flip the script here. Heavy skill damage versus non-Saladin type commanders. Okay, you're starting to see the idea of what's going on here. Same thing, 100,000 Zhang Yu versus Attila Takeda. Same idea. Taking a positive trade, Zhang Yu Saladin versus Attila Takeda, who has obviously no skill damage, no feral nature. Zhang Yu Saladin in this instance had feral nature, full skill damage tree, like you saw earlier in the video. And again, taking a positive trade from a severely wounded standpoint, like for like. Here's again, Attila Takeda, Zhang Yu Saladin, without feral nature, And as you can see, I took a far worse trade. It was almost 3K additional severely wounded. I still won, but I took a lot more severely wounded than if I had not done so with feral nature. So you can see how Attila Takeda caused more damage because I wasn't causing as much damage because feral nature was not on this build here. This is the typical non-feral nature build for a Genghis Khan or really any Cav skill damage, skill talent tree commander. What do you get with this versus what you get with feral nature? Okay, so you'll get, because again, we're looking at the main build here. You're basically losing this section here, these 4 deals here. You're missing the increased attack Cav units by 1% up to 3%, so that's 3 attack. You're missing 1% health. You're missing 6% march speed, which is good. And you're missing disarm, which is that 10% chance to reduce enemy attack by 20% for the next 2 seconds. Again, nice talent, procs about at the same clip that feral nature does. Now also, you have to keep in mind, to get over here as well, you need to lose these 2 here, which is 1% defense and 1.5% attack. So you're actually losing 1% defense by not going feral nature. You're losing only 1.5% attack because you're losing 1.5% down here as well, and you are losing the 1% health. So you get 1% health at the cost of 1% defense. You get 1.5% attack, and you get 6% march speed and the disarm talent. That's what you get instead of feral nature. Now, feral nature, by and large, the main reason you want to have this is because it's going to give you a chance to be casting earlier than your opponent, okay? So if you're fighting somebody who does not have feral nature or is using a support build, an attack build, a defense build, etc., you're going to be better off with feral nature because you're going to be casting first almost all the time, especially if you've got feral nature. If you don't have feral nature, it could be kind of a wash, but with feral nature, you have a very, very good chance of starting off first. Now, why is that important? And again, this is why I think, one of the big reasons why I should say, because I've got a couple reasons, why I think feral nature is so important in this game, and it's not something to just be discarded because you can over rage or any of that stuff. You're not going to get to 220 rage all the time. It's not going to happen, right? You're not going to get to 220 rage every turn all the time. That's just not how the game works, including the way that it was outlined in John Wick's video, right? Like you have the possibility of getting to 220 rage with a few different components, including Rejuvenate and Williams buff and Jones buff and all these other buff, Trajan buff, all those things, right? You can do that, all right? You can do that, but that's not every turn, and that's not something you can plan for. And certainly in KVK fights, especially a group fight, you're not going to be able to control generally what you're going to get on which turns, when, where, how, and why, and all that stuff. You can't control any of it. It's chaos. The only thing you can control is having Feral Nature or not having Feral Nature. And even if I did have all those buffs, I would still have Feral Nature because there's going to be turns where I'm not maxed. And that's, if Feral Nature procs, that could make it to where I could cast a turn earlier. That one turn compounds over time if it's a long fight, which it never is, right? It never is a long fight. It's always short fights, okay? So that's why Feral Nature is very, very strong, because you can cast first, and you can then set the tone for the fight. Meaning, if you're casting first, so say I've got Genghis YSG, dear God, super glass cannon, but you can cast on turn 6. You can cast on turn 6, guys, with Genghis YSG, or earlier. I think I've gotten it to where it was 5. I want to say it was turn 5. I got to turn 5 because I had Feral Nature procced and Art of Archery procced multiple times in that first skill cycle. You can get it so early. You can have it to where you've cast twice in the time that your opponent has only cast once. That is effectively double the damage, okay, from a skill damage standpoint. You don't get that without Feral Nature. You don't get that possibility without Feral Nature. Now, does that happen all the time? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But you have to keep in mind, when it comes to actual KVK fighting, more often than not, I'd say 80 to 90% of the fights that you're in don't last that long. More often than not, you're fighting for 8 to 10 seconds at a time. Generally, you're not out there fighting with your skills going nonstop for 10 turns, 10 turns, 10 turns, 10. It doesn't work that way. When you're fighting on the open field, you're going to a target, you're smashing it. You're switching targets, you're smashing it. You're switching targets, you're smashing it. You're not going and plunking yourself in the middle and then saying attack, and then that attack lasts for 5 minutes, especially with Feral Rage, because you kill stuff so quickly. Why is it important to cast quicker as well from a damage standpoint, but for other reasons, right? So Guan, for instance. Guan has an AoE silence. You don't want to have Guan waiting for 8, 9, 10 seconds. You want to silence everything you possibly can as quickly as possible. Not only does that help give more damage out early on, but from a group benefit standpoint, you want to be silencing things as often as possible, and Feral Nature gives you the opportunity to do that at a 1 to 2 turn clip earlier difference every single skill cycle. It doesn't guarantee it. It doesn't guarantee it, but again, it gives you the opportunity. And again, you either have the opportunity or you don't have the opportunity. And with the infantry tree, for instance, you'll either have hold the line with some snare packages, or you'll have hold the line with Feral Nature on a Guan or a Sun Tzu type commander. So that's where you have to understand that it's not just about, yes, you can cap your rage, and yes, you can be at rage cap without Feral Nature, but there are more turns than one turn in a skill damage cycle, okay? So you have to understand that Feral Nature will proc not just during those times where you've already got a maxed out skill rage. You've got opportunity to have it during the times where you don't, where the only things that are proccing for you are Undying Fury and Burning Blood. That's 18 rage per cycle, plus the 100 that you get per base turn, depending on if you're winning or losing, etc., right? That's not skill cap. That plus Feral Rage is skill cap. Feral Nature is skill cap. So that's what you want to get. You want to get that extra skill turn earlier, especially with a commander like Guan with that silence, or with XY with the AoE defense debuff. Those are huge, huge, huge things. And again, if you're pairing those commanders with, say, a William on the back end, that's generating rage for you and the entire group. That's generating more AoE damage. That's generating other things like with YSG, more AoE damage. That's generating more rage with YSG with the Art of Archery skill, giving you the opportunity to cast even faster. Generating with buffs behind you, like maybe a Jones back there with you, or if you've got Mulan behind you, or all those things, right? They all add up to a actual experience in battle versus on paper. Yes, Feral Nature can be useless on certain turns, but not in the real world when you're fighting in KVK. There's things that you can do without Feral Nature, but if you want to kill faster, you have to have feral nature. You just have to have it. And horn, by extension, you need that. You need the horn to give you more rage, because you're going to get it on... You can't plan for these things. You can't plan for the proc of horn. You can't plan for the proc of feral nature. But what you can plan on is, over the course of a 10 to 30 second fight, I will outdamage you 100%. Unless you're a Saladin or a Ramses, I will outdamage you 100% with feral nature versus if I didn't have feral nature. Guaranteed. Put it in the books. Sign it. Deliver it. Okay. That's all I've got, guys. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I appreciate you all. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you guys in a future stream. See you guys next time. Cheers. Have a good one.